Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to have a game recap of Tales from the Loop. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Stargate Pioneer.
I'm Haley.
And I'm Lauren from Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D.
A podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the one you're listening to now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other podcasts
at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3,
2,
1.
Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. A couple quick announcements before we get things started today. First off, we missed an episode last week because of Thanksgiving and whatnot, and we had a whole lot of people here at our house and big old family, so we missed an episode last week. But we should be back to our normal schedule, normal release schedule, and we have a couple episodes of Night Witches in the can that should be starting to release to you guys this Friday, and we're recording another session this Saturday, so lots of awesomeness in store for you guys to be coming out for you. So those Night Witches episodes will release on Fridays, and that's every other Friday, and unless you're a Patreon supporter, and then they get released on the Patreon as soon as I'm done editing them. In addition to our normal schedule of things, we're going to get back to doing some reviews. We've got quite a few games that we want to get to reviewing that we've got some pretty good amount of experience with now, Night Witches being first among them. And then we've had a couple designers that have reached out to us with some different games that they have to have us check them out and see if we might enjoy them and review them. So those should be coming to you guys as well here pretty soon. Second announcement is we have another Indie RPG Day coming up in December, and we are finalizing the date with that now. We just got to make sure that that date is okay with the game store in Terre Haute, and we are planning to run Night Witches and one of the versions of Microscope. What's it called? The Adventure or?
No, it's, hold on. My mind is glorious blank. The one about the item. That's the one I want to run. I can't think of what it's called right now.
But it's in the gray Microscope book. I know that for sure. It's downstairs on the shelf. So, and that'll be in a couple weeks here in December. And the final announcement is if you follow us on Twitter or if you're part of our Facebook group, you probably have heard me mention a couple times about this new project that we started on called Troubadours. And we are putting together a Powered by the Apocalypse game that involves being sort of like Shakespearean era actors, putting on performances and that kind of stuff. And it kind of brings together all of my favorite parts of Night Witches, Monster Hearts, MAShed, Apocalypse World.
And Shakespeare.
So it draws from a lot of different places and looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. We have playbooks put together, basically 90%, and most of the sort of the foundation of the game put together, and we're about to start playtesting it. So I thought it would be cool if we sort of documented our design process on our Patreon. So even if you're not a Patreon supporter, you can go there and see the blog post there on Patreon about how our design process goes and some of the ways that we've struggled and changes that we've made and sort of previews of the game as they sort of get broken apart and put back together. And then in addition to that, if you are a Patreon supporter, we're going to put all of the materials up on there, and spoiler alert, there'll probably be some editing and changing of those as time goes by, and as we realize some things don't work and some things that do work that we want to modify. So check it out there. Looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to see if we can't break some Shakespeare in some Powered by the Apocalypse and see how much of a disaster we can make. All right. So we're just going to jump right into this one. We game stormed a Tales from the Loop game a couple weeks ago that we released, and Lacey took that game to our indie game days and ran that game in Terre Haute with what I sounded like was a lot of success. I was across the shop and I wasn't playing in it, but I heard tons and tons of laughter and awesome times and smiles and shenanigans. So
listen, there were two great successes that came out of this. First of all, I'm pretty sure I nailed the Eryctodromius pronunciation throughout the game. And Although, really, as far as dinosaur names go, it's not a bad one.
Right.
And when you look at it, it looks pretty much like you should be saying it that way. But the second one is actually 2 of the people that ended up sliding into my game were people that showed up with the intention of playing D&D Adventurers League. So I stole a couple of D&D players for what very well could have been their first non-D&D style
first
game.
foray into better games.
And they had a good time.
Right on. So we normally don't go back and recap the games that we sort of brainstorm here on the show, but over at Forgot My Dice, they mentioned on Twitter that they were in the process of putting together a Tales from the Loop game as well, and liked our Erictodromius idea, and asked how the game went and if we were going to kind of do a follow-up about what happened. So kind of thought it would be a cool idea to go back and look at the ideas that we had and what worked and what didn't, and sort of show you guys how we troubleshoot the games that we run and figure out how to sharpen the ideas and make them better. Because a lot of these games we end up running more than once, whether that's at a convention or another indie game day when there's different people there and whatnot. So big thanks to Gina, Jonathan, and Robert over at Forgot My Dice for inspiring this episode and enjoying some games that are awesome, like Tales from the Loop, and incorporating in Erictodromius.
Yeah, using my little buddy.
Right on. So we mentioned already that we had a couple players that just sort of came into this game not knowing anything really about Tales from the Loop. But the reason we brought Tales from the Loop to the Indie Game Day was because it was requested. Mm-hmm. By some people, and they wanted to check it out and see how the mechanics and the system worked. And well, Tales from the Loop is an awesome game, and the artwork is crazy good, so it's an easy sell to people, right? Mm-hmm. So there were some people at the table that knew about it and some people that didn't. So did you have any big hurdles in terms of kind of getting the people who had never had any experience outside of D&D up to speed with the game?
Not a lot of difficulty. There was a little bit of kind of hiccup when we were doing character creation, because I initially told them that they get so many points in attributes, and they started splitting it amongst everything on the character sheet. But I think that's because the things are jumbled together on the character sheet we printed instead of broken apart into 2 pieces where it specifically says attributes and skills. Mm-hmm. So they would distribute them amongst all of the things. Right. And I was like, no, wait, you're going to get, but like when you're used to doing a D&D sheet, that number of skill points for that big list of skills seems like an appropriate amount. So I was like, no, you're going to get more points for these things. So that happened actually with probably 3 of the 5 people at the table. Right. So that was just kind of something I didn't realize going out.
And
the
3 that it happened with, were they all 3
No. So two of them were.
2 of them were?
Yeah.
I know you picked up 2 that were there for Adventurers League, and then 1 was just another one that happened to walk in, right?
No, 2 were there for Adventures League. The other one was working until he got off work, and then the other 2 were there to play Tales from. Actually, the one that was there working was there to play Tales from. It was just going to be an hour late.
Right.
So. The other issue I had was when we were rolling up successes, they were rolling these dice and then adding the numbers together to give me a total instead of being no, just a 6 on the die. Every 6 on the die is a success.
Well,
Don't
when you're
add
so
them
used to rolling 3d6 and then you add them together, or 46 or whatever your fireball is. It's interesting when you haven't experienced any other games, sort of the baggage is the wrong word, but the customs that you get used to having with a D&D
and the D&D guys already had their polyhedrals out, and I'm like, you only need that one right there, and you're going to need more than that. So,
right on. So
I had extras, so whatever. But
just briefly to focus on the mechanical aspects of the game, no plot at all. Were there any hiccups that you had or noticed with people that had a sense of the game versus didn't, other than the character creation part of it and just the D6 aspect? Did they understand the relationships and how they work? Were there any hiccups that way?
All of that was pretty, the system is very simple.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's just attribute plus skill. And I would tell them what the roll was every time, saying, okay, so add those together, roll that many D6s. And then I would remind them if they failed, okay, you can spend a luck, or you can push your luck, or, you're doing this, you have your iconic item with you that gives you a +2 in this instance. So.
Right on. Now, I know there's a big help mechanic in Tales from the Loop.
Yes. I did have a few hiccups there. There was one guy that just couldn't get it. You don't get to roll 2. You're going to give him a die. So I'd be like, do this thing, who's making the roll?
Right.
And then like I had one person that still wanted to continually roll as well. I'm like, no, one person makes the roll.
Right.
You're helping. Tell me how you're helping.
So are there any other mechanical aspects to mention real quick before we jump into the plot of how things went?
I don't think so.
Right on.
I mean,
I didn't figure there would be. Tales from the Loop is a very clean, simple, straightforward system. I feel like whether you have a lot of experience in gaming or no experience in gaming, it's straightforward enough and easy enough to jump right into. The character sheet is pretty clean, and there's not this giant 3rd edition skill list to be intimidated by or whatever. So it makes it easier to get off the ground and running it. So, all right. So I think logical place to start off with is that this entire scenario was based around a dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
And initially when we brainstormed this, we had a choice of 3 dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And I chose kind of, I don't know, we sort of narrowed it down. I thought the Eryctodromeus was the most compelling of them. So overall, do you think that we made the right choice in picking the Eryctodromeus?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the game could work with any of the 3 dinosaurs.
Right.
But I like the Eryctodromeus because, kind of like we said before, he's a little less well known than a lot of the other dinosaurs.
Right.
And although I did have somebody at my table that was like, "Oh, an Eryctodromeus," I was like, "Yeah, absolutely."
With that,
but he's a college teacher, so.
Oh, Royal, there you go. So did that present any
new or
I don't think challenges?
It wasn't like, I'm a dinosaur, but it was like maybe in 2006 I heard, read the news article that this was a thing, or remembered it or something like that.
Right.
Just basically I've heard the name and I kind of know what it is.
Well, that's very cool though to have that at the table and then have someone realize it and be excited about it. That's a really cool moment to have. And I think you're always going to have that with certain dinosaurs, but I feel like the excitement is less because everybody knows the pterodactyl or everybody knows the stegosaurus, right? So, okay, very cool. Well, I'm glad that worked out then. Before we get into the plot, we laid out 3, sort of like a broad strokes of 3 main NPCs in the game. So the first one was Dr. Laura Bradfield.
Yep.
And she was, remind me, kind of this
socially awkward but still friendly researcher person.
And did she work out okay in the...
I'm going to stop you right there, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. I did not use any of those 3 NPCs.
Oh, wow.
Not a single one.
Okay. So let me ask you about that then. Initially, when we talked about this, we had talked about having either Sam Withers, which was the junior researcher, or Luke Pearson, which was the tracker, to be tied to the characters in a relationship way. So did that not happen?
I didn't end up doing their relationship characters for them.
Okay.
So people just kind of picked a person.
Right.
And then we created those. So
did you mold any of the characters that we made here into their relationships? Like if they made...
I mean, that would have been a good idea, but no.
Okay, right on.
Basically, you can just take all of those NPCs and completely scrap them and throw them in the wastebasket.
So is that...
But I did pull some characters from the book that I had written down that I thought may come into play. Not like necessarily aspects of them, but people that they mention in the book. That way I thought, well, if any of these people, a couple of them already have the book, but anybody else that ends up picking it up will be like, oh, well, I've encountered this character before.
Right.
So there was a school janitor, and they had a very brief encounter with him. Billy Pearson, that owns the Pearson Salvage, which is what I ended up naming the junkyard because there happened to be one in the book already.
Right.
And then the picture of that led to this lovely inclusion of, because I don't know that I would have honestly thought to include all of the airships. That would have been a really great idea because it's very Tales from the Loopy, but like my mind doesn't automatically go to airship when I think junkyard.
Right.
So that was helpful. And then the school librarian we used, but one of the other characters ended up kind of changing the name of it and calling them someone else. So I just changed the name. But I had the idea of the librarian from the get-go. So all those people were in there, including Billy Pearson's 2 dogs, Daisy and Duke.
Right.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
They aren't actually in the book, but I thought every good junkyard needs dogs.
Probably should have mentioned this at the beginning. How long did this session actually go for?
It was about 4 hours right on the money.
I thought it was, yeah, because I remember watching.
But that includes character creation and actually kind of a pause at the 1 hour mark to bring in 3 other characters. So we had kind of character creation, a short bit of play, then a second like mini character creation.
Right.
and then bringing everybody up to speed. So probably like 3 hours of actual gameplay.
Okay. And then 2 short character creation sessions. So did it mess with the rhythm of the game too much that you had that break in the middle of there, or not really in the middle, but
I don't think it really like messed with the rhythm exactly, but it was kind of, we were at a funny place and, you know, like kids. So I kind of, to start with, each one of the kids got a morning scene, because in Tales from the Loop, it recommends giving them each a scene to kind of set the tone for their character.
right.
And you don't have a lot of time in the one shot, so I didn't give them any like real role play. But what I did was say, okay, you're getting up, you're getting ready for school in the morning. Tell me what that looks like for your character.
Right.
You know, are you getting up at the alarm? Are you on time? Are you early? Are you late? Are your parents there? Are you having breakfast? Like, walk me through what morning looks like for your character, because that tells you a lot about a person.
2 or 3 Eggo waffles.
Right. Like, are you somebody who gets out of bed when the alarm goes off? Are you up before? Do you hit the snooze button 5 times? You know?
Do you ride the bus? Does your mom drive you to school?
Right. Are your parents present?
Do you take the bike?
Are you taking the bike? I had 4 bikes and 1 scooter. I don't know what he was thinking. But
Oh, scooter. Not good. Right on.
but yeah, so it kind of was a brief introduction to how their character behaves. And then they all arrived at the school. And there was one person that opted to be like, he's like, I don't know, I show up at like 9. That's what time school starts, right? I'm like, that's perfect. So it ends up like, so the school's flooded to begin with, right? But everybody else is supposed to already be there. So we kind of went back. I recapped what happened in homeroom and then said, okay, so we're just going to say you guys were all in the bathroom together. This is what everybody saw. And they ended up locked in the janitor's closet. So I'm like, okay, so you're all in here together.
Right.
So basically what happened is like this water's gushing everywhere from the burst pipe. Like we talked about, there was going to be a flood at the school because that's something interesting. And it's a burrowing dinosaur. So we talked about how that could kind of be like a pipe situation. And they go to investigate the janitor's like maintenance closet, and they're trying to get all these pipes to work, and they're not having any success. So of course the janitor comes because it's his job to be there, and he's doing maintenance. He's trying to fix this problem. And so they're all trying to hide in this closet while he's in there, and then he leaves and locks them all in.
Right.
So enter our one late kid who's trying to bust him out after that, basically. So then the gang's all together.
So how many characters were there? 5?
5.
5?
Yeah.
And how many archetypes are there in Tales from the Loop?
I want to say 7 or 8.
Okay.
It's probably an even number. It's probably 8.
Okay. So you not all, well, 8 people would be a lot at the table for one game, but
Yeah, I feel like they give you some extras.
oh yeah. No.
Not all of you guys are going to be here.
Right. So the opening scene was as we had initially laid it out, right, with this flooding. So was there a bully encounter in there like we had kind of mentioned, or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Actually, somebody played the computer geek. And I had a bookworm, but he came around later. So the computer geek has actually chose the bully as his problem.
Oh, very good.
So then we gave the bully a name, and then he kicks his backpack over, and he ends up knocking, and he had this candy, and he said it was nerds. So it ends up with like nerds all over the floor.
Right.
Well, it ends up later like they're alone and like hungry, so he ends up eating the floor nerds later on in the game, which was awesome.
Was there lots of moments of like, ew?
There was for me. I don't know that anybody else was bothered, but I was like, that's disgusting and
Right on.
awesome.
Very good. All right, so we had the flooding of the school, and they got out of school, the encounter with the bully. So where did they go after the school then? They go back to the hideout?
So they went to the hangout. I gave them some options. A couple of them went back home and like changed clothes, which we just kind of retconned. And it's kind of like, okay, scene switch. We're at the hangout now. And so for their hangout, they chose an arcade, which is not what I was planning at all.
Right.
So most of them were playing games, but there's always one broke kid with no quarters, right? So they have like a booth that's back in the corner. They kind of described it. So I'm like, okay, well, you hear some scratching like coming from like right outside the door or whatever. So he ends up burrowing up from the ground just outside the back door. So I just kind of like, worked that out.
Right.
Arcade was not what I was envisioning at all. And then they were going through this thing, and I'm like sitting here in my head, and like, oh my God, how am I going to get this dinosaur in here now? But yeah. So this is where it kind of jumps way off the rails, because one kid chose to have a pet dog.
Oh.
And I had not considered, even though we'd had a pet dog in a game before, how that's going to work with this dinosaur.
Right.
But we had given the dinosaur kind of a personality that was like friendly and curious, but
Right.
also very fast and kind of like a toddler. So
Right.
you can imagine like a toddler that's never seen a dog before, if you've ever seen how that goes.
Yeah.
So the dinosaur like ran away from them because this dog is barking and chasing it. I'm like, oh no, what are we gonna do now? So yeah, that was stressful.
We had kind of talked about how there was going to be a line that could be drawn between the school, the research station, the school, and then the hideout, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they wanted to realize that it was in a line of how it was burrowing, did they make that connection or no?
Well, they made the connection because the dinosaur ran away and ran back into the burrow.
In the tunnel. Uh-huh.
So they sent the smallest kid in after it. So they followed the tunnel all the way to where it connected to one of the maintenance tunnels.
So hang on a second. How far did they send the kid in by himself?
They could hear
all the way.
Like they made a roll to hear him, and so one of the kids made a really good roll, and they could hear him and follow him along.
Oh,
basically,
okay.
is what was going on. He was kind of checking in with them, but
Right.
they sent him a good distance all the way. I had it connect to kind of like the maintenance shaft, basically like a sewer access
Right.
to it, so that the rest of them could get down there.
Very cool.
When it widened up, because it makes sense if it's a maintenance tunnel to be able to have some above ground access. So, and they all joined in at that point.
So did you end up with from there going to the dump truck, seeing like we had kind of envisioned?
No, so they followed this tunnel all the way back to the research lab because that's where it leads.
Oh, okay.
So they end up in the dinosaur pen.
Oh, so they really kind of accelerated things very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. They went all the way back to the Loop Research Station. And then things got even crazier, if you will, because I imagine like a zoo habitat, basically.
Right.
So they find the door that goes back in. And so what kind of things do you find there? Like treats for the dinosaur, food, and things to keep the dinosaur calm. So they find a tranquilizer gun.
Okay.
Because that seemed reasonable.
Well, and it does, and it's a huge '80s trope too. The trank gun thing, the dart, the.
So then I thought, right, these are young kids, so somebody would be like, we should probably get out of here before we get in trouble. No, they decide to go into the research station.
As all good role players do, they make terrible decisions.
They see a
Very good.
security camera, realize they're being watched. So then they go find the security office, which I allowed because there was one guy there who's a tech geek. So I'm like, you can see where this feed goes. Like, you can follow. This is the 80s. You can follow the wires. It's not like super difficult.
Right.
And they end up shooting the security guard with a tranquilizer gun. And I'm like, you guys are terrible decision makers, and you're going to get in so much trouble.
Right on.
So that part went a little off the rails, and I did not anticipate any of that happening either, but we went with it. And at that point, they decided they thought they may have killed a person because, and this is probably the most interesting thing, when kids find a dinosaur and a dinosaur like storage place, they automatically assume that there are probably at least 80 other dinosaurs in the facility.
At least 80. I like that's a nice whole number. 80, at least 80.
So they weren't sure if they had shot this guy with the regular tranquilizer for small dinosaurs or some giant
like a
T-Rex tranquilizer.
Yeah.
So they thought they may have killed this guy. And then they were trying to leave like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So they ended up crawling back out through the hole because we had a conversation about how, okay, you guys know this is a government facility. Any other exit you try to leave is probably going to have armed guards. Right. So they went back out that way. And then we were kind of back on track a little bit. I don't know if this is too gamey storytelling-ish, but...
A little bit, but I think it makes sense to sort of put context to it.
Condense and hit the highlights.
No, I agree. And then I like the idea of how it kind of shows where things went on track and where things went off and how you improvise and how you adapt.
Wildly off track.
Okay. All right, so then from there we go back to and have our junkyard scene.
Yes. The junkyard scene, I would just say was like terribly forced, but they had the dinosaur. They put the dinosaur in a backpack and were riding on their bike with it. So it's that burrowing dinosaur, curious, he climbs out of the backpack. Actually, he tears out of the bottom of the backpack.
Right.
And then, fortunately, the character that was carrying him is very strong, but not very observant. So he didn't know he was gone right away. And then he's like, oh no, where'd the dinosaur go? And they see like the back of a pickup truck. And the dinosaur's like, What's up, guys?
Right.
I think I probably shouldn't have made it a pickup truck, but like an enclosed kind of truck, you know, like the pickups that have the
topper
on it, because I think that would have made it easier. Because then when they got to the junkyard, like the driver gets out to go to get let in, and then he's just like, "Oh, snatch dinosaur, what's up?" But the kid that tried to take him at that point wasn't very fast, so the dinosaur outruns him and goes into the junkyard. But it was just a little more forced than I would have liked, and I think that would have been solved if the truck had just had a topper so that he couldn't easily grab the dinosaur while the guy was opening the door.
So do you think that the players noticed that it felt forced, or did it seem
I think so. I think they did. I don't think they had a problem with it, but they were just like, well, but obviously I had a map of the junkyard too, so that was always part of the plan. It was like, look what I drew while we were having this conversation.
Right. So did you draw that while you were running everything, or no?
No, I drew this.
Okay, I thought you had it beforehand.
Yeah. Actually, in the car on the way there, I'd been planning to do it, but I just hadn't done it yet.
So we mentioned sort of like this chase scene with the dogs and whatnot. Did that happen and kind of go according to plan? And then
there was just a great big old mess inside the junkyard, and there were kids trying to climb the fence, and somebody got stuck and had to leave their pants at the top of the fence, and somebody else couldn't climb the fence at all, and they were trying to like distract the dogs from the outside. And then so I hadn't originally planned it, but I had two guys from the research facility show up to the salvage yard, like asking about, you know, escaped
dinosaurs.
Not dinosaurs specifically, but they were like, somebody stole. It was basically because they heard him talking at the arcade too, before when they found the dinosaur, when they came back up from the tunnel. There was somebody asking at the front desk about stolen research experiment from the facility. So they see these guys, and then they show up at the junkyard too, which I thought was a nice addition because it kind of made it seem like a little more urgent,
right? That
they not just walk around town with the dinosaur.
Well, yeah, and it's an easy way that makes sense to sort of get the information to the players that they're being that they're looking for the dinosaur and whatnot without it, because had they been in a clubhouse, there would have been no access to have that conveyed to them sort of in the middle of nowhere in the forest or whatever. So lots of shenanigans in the junkyard then, essentially is what you're telling me.
And including the airships was a great idea for a couple of reasons. First, people were reading these and like, what are these things? And then I got to show them the pictures from the book. So they actually got to look at some of the artwork from the book itself. And they were like, oh, wow, this is really cool. So I showed them the front view of the salvage yard, because that's a picture that's in there. Right. And then of all of the different airships and vehicles. So it kind of...
I saw you had some of the blueprints of them printed out that are in the book of the airships. So did they react? I mean, you know.
Yeah, they really, really liked that part. They were like, oh, these are so cool. Right. And there were like a couple of them that voiced interest in possibly like buying the book when this is done, which was like, yeah.
Well, the artwork is so good. It's such an easy sell.
Yeah, and that's what I told them too. I was like, this is an RPG book that's made by an artist. There's a lot of really good artwork in
like
this.
The Tales from the Loop and the one that they've got coming out next, and some of the stuff that Zach does. It's almost not fair because the art is so good.
Yeah.
And that's what's more than anything, that's what sells a lot of games. And if you really have that iconic look, and Tales from the Loop is just such a fantastic blending of a couple different things, and then with Stranger Things coming out, it just really does a great job of selling itself. Just like, look at this amazing artifact of a book. So after the junkyard, did they end up taking did they end up going the mine route to try and set it free, or how did that come about?
Not at all. They had one kid that was a very wealthy kid, like my parents own the bulk of this town. Okay. Type kid. Right. He's like the whatever they are, the Terre Haute, or like the Indianapolis people. Right. You know?
The Holmans.
Yeah, the Holmans. Yeah. So they're the Holmans of Boulder, Colorado.
Right. The Carnegies or whatever.
So he's like, well, I probably have like this treehouse or something. I'm like, yes, you have a treehouse that your parents had built for you. You didn't have to do any work at all. You never use it, but it's there, and you guys have some acres of wooded area. And so basically they took the dinosaur to his fenced estate, basically, to live.
And then cut it loose?
Yeah.
So was there any encounters with trackers or researchers trying to take the dinosaur from them?
Just the two investigator guys, and one of the kids stayed at the front to distract them.
Oh, okay.
Quite brilliantly, actually. So they were riding their bicycles, and it's all a downhill thing, and he just ran his bicycle right into the side of their sedan and then pretended to be injured for like 20 minutes.
Right on. That's an awesome plan. I like it. Who did that?
Simon's character.
Yeah.
Phil Masterson.
Right on. All right. Well, so did you have an epilogue for the game?
No, it was basically just like, okay, so you guys set this dinosaur free, and that's probably going to be troublesome in the future.
Right.
But no, it came to a pretty natural end once they got out of the junkyard and then were able to do that. So
very good. So I think this is a perfect example of planning a game and then players wrecking it for you. Sort of like, not that you want to put players on rails, but you have to build some kind of a structure and a plan for how the game is going to go and then adapt things on the fly. So at the end of that episode where we games from this whole thing, we had a very sort of broad strokes layout of a game, right? Mm-hmm. And I think your exact words were, I would run a game with this. And I felt like I was in the exact same spot, that that's enough for me to be able to sit down at a table and run a game. Now, having run this, and you mentioned you did quite a bit of improvising and adjusting things and trying to make the scenes that you had planned out work. Do you think what we had put together was enough or not enough or too much or too rigid, or how like looking back at this, what do you think about what we put together?
I don't think it's too rigid. I like to have a fairly well set out plan with scenes. I still think that works the best for me, but you have to be willing to let some of those go entirely. Now, I pulled the salvage yard together, and it did feel a little forced, but I don't think that it felt so forced that I should have just gotten rid of it. Right. I don't think that's the case at all.
And to be fair, it's also sort of like the set piece of the adventure. Mm-hmm. So you sort of want to have it happen because in terms of demoing the game and all the artwork and what the world of Tales from the Loop is, you want to have that in there, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's also where I saw some of the best PC cooperation happening.
Right.
Because they're all trying to work together to distract the investigators, distract the dogs, get the dinosaur, and
so did you do a lot of camera one, camera two, back and forth?
Yeah.
Right on.
But with 5, it's very manageable.
Yeah.
And 2 or 3 of them were together.
Yeah.
More or less at one point, so it wasn't terribly difficult. And it was kind of like, okay, so you made this roll to distract, so that's kind of like the number. It's not specific rounds, but it's in my head the number of rounds that you succeeded in distracting them for. So that's the number of actions your friends on the inside kind of get to do before it goes back to you and you have to try something else.
Right on. Well, it's nice to sort of chain those things together to where everyone feels like they need to do a good job and what they're doing is important, because however good I do over here is exactly how many rounds you get and how many actions you get to take. That's pretty clean and saying, hey, please do a good job on this roll. Like, spend your luck and use your resources to do a good job, right? So very cool.
I would, if I had to do it again, probably make some more NPCs. It helped when I went back through the book and found some of the ones that were already in there. But there's some things I overlooked that were pretty basic, like a homeroom teacher.
Right.
Like you're all probably going to end up in homeroom. I might want to have some kind of teacher figured out for that. I just kind of pulled it off the fly and made a Mrs. version of Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller.
Right on.
And we talked about when I made the episode, I wanted to do the pre-gen characters, and I didn't end up doing that.
Right.
I do think that if I went back and did it again, I would let them make their own characters, because that part didn't take that long.
It's a simple system,
but I would give them a pool of NPC anchors to choose from that were people that I'd already planned to incorporate.
Right on.
I think that would make my life easier and make their choices more meaningful in the short story arc that you have.
Well, it sort of streamlines it down too. It sort of bottlenecks them into picking, different ones. This is what I had intended to do with that Harry Potter game, was it laid out a series of NPCs to say that these will be involved in the game. So pick from these if you want to. So.
Or like leave it as an option. Like you can pick somebody else, but these are people that I already plan to involve, so they're good choices. something like that.
Right. A lot of these that we do at these indie RPG days that we run is sort of like to feature and demo these games. Did you feel like in running it this way, in this scenario that we sort of created, that it featured the things that make Tales from the Loop cool?
Yeah, absolutely. The junkyard has all of the cool vehicles in it.
Right.
There's a dinosaur, which is automatically a cool thing that can be in Tales from the Loop. There's an investigative sort of aspect, like where did this come from? There's some kids versus adults that's naturally built into this scenario. I mean, those are kind of the big things.
Right.
Teamwork, mystery. It's something that's a little bit unbelievable. So if you were to go to an adult for help, they'd be like, that's not a thing.
Right.
Because that's also something that's in Tales from the Loop. Like, the adults are aloof, unhelpful, and if they do help you, then they're going to expect something really big from you later on. It's kind of like, like in Goonies, where it's like, oh my God, there's gunshots. And you're like, oh, Chunk's going to blow it right out from the beginning because he calls the cops. But then the cops are like, this is the 42nd time you've called us this year. Whatever, Charles. Figure it out.
Right on. Very cool. Well, it was very clear that everyone around the table is having a good time playing, right? So did you enjoy running this game?
Yeah, this honestly, this was the easiest game that I've run.
In Tales from the Loop or at indie RPG games?
At an indie RPG game, period.
Right on.
Like for people that aren't at our gaming table. It's just the time period is so easy for me.
Right.
Like, I'm very familiar with what happens in, 1980s. Those are the movies I grew up with.
Right.
And what I'm not familiar with, I know enough that I can just sort of fudge it,
Right.
Yeah. Then there's just like a handful of extra sort of science fiction-y things that you have to add on to that. And the rest is just pretty like basic plot stuff. I mean, it's not difficult. And I really like running games where the players are kids. I just think it's fun because everybody's automatically in a different kind of mindset when you tell them that they're going to be playing a child.
I agree. It's a lot of fun. Tales from the Loop is an awesome game. It's easy fun. It's sort of like the 7th Sea. It does what it does really well. And it
well, if you were adults, it'd be something different. But when you say, hey, you can be a kid, it just kind of gives people permission to be a little bit silly, know? Not that it's like a wild, goofy setting, but it's fantastical. Yeah. It's not.
And it's fun. It's a game about having fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, very cool. Well, do you have anything else about this one to sort of bring this thing to a close?
I don't know. I feel like I've said all the things that I needed to say.
Right on. Well, do you think that you would run this at another place, whether it's another indie RPG day or like at Hoosier Con or Gen Con maybe?
Yeah, I think I would totally do that. It's fun to run. Mm-hmm. I don't know why the dinosaur instantly makes it better, but it just does.
Right on.
Look at him. He's so cute. My little pencil drawing.
Very cool. Well, big thanks and a shout out to the folks over at Forgot My Dice. And thank you for inspiring this episode and sort of giving us a shout out. And good on you for putting together another Tales from the Loop game because it is an awesome game. And those of you out there who don't know or haven't checked it out, go out there, check it out. It's a lot of fun to play and read. It's just a great game, a great book, and lots of great artwork. So check it out.
I really want like an Erictodromius like miniature now, or like a like a T-shirt. # Team Erictodromius.
# Team Erictodromius.
Something like that.
I think that'll do it for us. You guys know that we don't really do a whole lot of gaming stories on this show because we try to keep things a little general so we can give you things that you can actually use for your games. But we thought it would be nice to sort of show you a before and after of one of the games that we put together and how it all came together and worked. So hopefully that this works out for you and you can kind of give you an idea of how we sort of troubleshoot the problems that we have with our games and how we adapt and improvise our storylines and make things work. Well, I think that'll do it for us. Quick Gonna Geek promo here. We've got the Gonna Geek Network has started a Discord server, so we have a Just More Fixed channel over there, and I'll link it in the show notes on this episode, and we'll get it linked on the website as well. So you can check that out and come chat with the Gonna Geek Network podcast hosts and listeners on our new Discord server. There's a channel for every Gonna Geek show, as well as some general channels for all of your geeky chat needs. Find the servers at GonnaGeekNetwork.com/Discord. So hopefully we will be able to connect you guys there, as you can also connect to us on Discord there or on Twitter at Just One More Fix, or as well on our Facebook group.
Did you just say Discworld?
Discworld, I may have.
That may have just been what I heard in my head. I don't know.
So check out the Gun & Geek Discord server. You can find that linked at gunandgeeknetwork.com. I'll link it in our show notes as well. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix. You can support us at Patreon, and you can get our updates on Troubadours, as well as the play materials if you support us at Patreon. Otherwise, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.